A new idea can change the way we understand and exist in our world. Of course, we all know this. We wouldn't be here today if we didn't believe in the power of new ideas. But if we look across history, ours is rife with a resistance to new ideas and often an outright rejection to them. So how can these two things coexist? How can, on the one hand, we all intuitively understand the power of a new idea and how it can transform the world, but on the other hand, have this internal reflex to say no when we hear something new? Let's consider an experiment. In 1960, English psychologist John Wasson conducted an experiment that became known as the 2-4-8 experiment, legendary. Subjects were brought into the room and examined and shown different sorts of number sequences. And all of these sequences, although this was the classic example, were driven by a mathematical rule that Wasson kept secret. So they were asked to provide their own sequences to try to guess the rule. And what would typically happen is they would look at a rule such as this and then come back with, 4, 8, 16, to which Wasson would say, yes, that follows my rule. What is my rule? And they would guess, what would you guess? Anyone? Right, doubles every time, right? Exactly. And Wasson would say, no, I'm sorry, that does not follow my rule, try again. Now this is where the experiment gets interesting, because what would typically happen is the subjects would think about it a moment and then come back with another number sequence that was fairly identical, followed the same pattern. The numbers would be different, but it followed the same pattern. The actual rule, by the way, is that the numbers simply have to increase in any way. All right. Wasson was examining a psychological principle known as confidence bias or my side bias. And what this is, in the simplest terms, is our tendency to rely on what we think we know instead of looking at a problem in a new way, even when new information is coming in telling us that maybe we should. All right, I'll step back a moment. I have been fascinated by the human psyche for as long as I can remember. Back in college, I studied literature, psychology, philosophy. Then I went on to graduate school where I studied a field called educational psychology, and this is the study of how we learn and acquire information. We ask questions like, why do we remember some information and forget others? Why do some pieces of information that come in strike us as credible and others as dubious, etc.? Big questions often, few with simple answers. So after I graduated, I needed to find a profession that would give me the tools and latitude and discipline to find answers to these questions. And after a long search, I found my calling. Advertising. That is the immortal Chuck Norris, by the way. I like to think of advertising half-jokingly as the black sheep of the psychology world. Most people wouldn't associate the two disciplines at all. But advertisers and psychologists have asked a lot of the same questions over the years. What makes us tick? Why do we remember some things and forget others? Why do some phenomena drive us to action and others just kind of lay dormant in our minds? So advertising in all of its forms, the traditional print, TV, television, and new media like content marketing, social media, search engine marketing. And for the purposes today, all of that, when I say advertising, I'm talking about all of it. Advertising is a study of the mind, right? How do we sell through persuasion? Now, the one distinction we can clearly make between fields of psychology and advertising is not a pure science. It's more of an artistic, art-science blend. At least historically it has been. Up until about 6 years ago. In 2008, when the bottom dropped out of the marketplace, advertisers, companies that use advertising and marketing, started to shrink their budgets, and they became very reluctant to invest in anything that wasn't assured to give them a strong return on their investment. At the same time, however, media companies like Google, Facebook, Comcast even, were able to provide audience data at a level never before seen. So this was great news at that time, and it continues to be, kind of. We'll get to that. But it gave companies a sense of a lifeboat that they can cling to in a time of economic tsunami, right? Salvation was in the facts. The problem is, the facts aren't the truth. Now, what do I mean by this? I'll give you an example from my recent advertising past. About 3 years ago, I'm working at an agency. We have as a client I can't say their name, but they're a national restaurant chain. We've all been there. Well, hopefully we haven't all been there, but if you want to live. Right. We'll call them tchotchkes for the purpose of today's talk. So we presented the client what we thought was a really innovative first quarter idea. Time and location-specific messages would be pushed to customers' mobile devices. So, for example, I'm sitting in my office on a Tuesday around lunchtime, I'm getting hungry, and boom, a message appears on my cell telling me, hey, there's a tchotchkes 1.3 miles from your office, click here for a map, and we have lunch specials today, click here to find out what they are and make a reservation if you like, right? Reaching the right customer at the right time with the right information, really good, especially 3 years ago. This was really forward-thinking stuff. But the client was running a campaign presently in the fourth quarter that was doing really well, and it was fairly simple stuff, email and social media, and coupons and that type of thing. So they decided, great idea, thanks guys, but we're gonna run with this again because it works. So you probably know how this ends. They run the same campaign and it flatlines this time around. Now in retrospect, everything's, 20/20 hindsight, they had all those holiday shoppers out, and with the simple planting of a seed through email or social media, that, don't forget to go to tchotchkes for lunch, people would jump out from the malls and go get lunch or dinner. So fourth quarter, they killed it. In first quarter, not only do you not have that holiday shopping, but in retail, this is known as the resolution phase of the year. So after you've behaved horribly around the holidays, you resolve to eat better. So you're much less likely to frequent a restaurant that's known for, bacon-wrapped buffalo wings. Right? So this is the danger, because businesses are always under pressure to predict the future, right? Their jobs, people within these industries, their jobs depend on it. So they like to be able to look at data in the present tense, right? What did the client say? We're going with what works. But data inherently exists in the past tense, and it's a sort of mind game we play with ourselves. Let's talk about sex. We haven't gotten there yet. It's in the very title of this talk, and I have not paid off on the T's, so let's talk about it. All right, there are a lot of assumptions that drive the majority of the advertising you've seen for decades, and one of them is that advertising works when it grabs attention. Hence the truism of sex sells, right? We all know this and believe it to be true. If I can grab your attention, I can sell you something. This is an ad, Pepsi ad, circa 1957 or 58. This is an Armani jeans ad that ran about a year ago. So we can see while the creative has evolved, the underlying truism remains. We believe that or most of us believe that if you can grab attention as an advertiser, you're doing your job. And I could see some of the looks on the face of the audience. I guess I'm doing my job today with this. All right. But let's challenge that truism for a moment with two examples, one from the academic side, one from the professional side. All right. When I was in graduate school, we poured over volumes and volumes of research about the way students learn, effective ways and not so effective ways. And what we found was, when students are deeply engaged in material, they tend to retain a larger amount of it for a longer amount of time. So, for instance, if a student is given a chapter to read or an article to read and asked to come in the next day prepared to write an essay or to engage in a debate on the topic, they do very well. However, if a student is asked to engage in a more passive type of learning, rote memorization drills or just listening to a lecture, they typically don't do nearly as well. So what we found is that mere exposure to information isn't enough to enable true learning. So if we extrapolate this out to the advertising world, if I can grab your attention and expose you to my message in this moment, great, but is that necessarily going to stick with you? Is it going to inform your buying decision sometime down the road? It's a big question. And a lot of times, we've avoided the answer or attempting to answer, which is a problem. The other piece comes from, again, the professional side, from Unilever specifically. They came out a few years ago with some findings regarding their marketing that were revelatory. Now, for those of you that don't know, Unilever is a conglomerate that owns probably half the brands you see in a typical supermarket. And Unilever came forth and shared with everyone that that advertising recall does not necessarily correlate strongly with an increase in sales with a lot of the campaigns they've run. So, for instance, a lot of us here probably know that Dove soap, a Unilever brand, is made with a quarter cup of moisturizing cream. That we can recall that does not necessarily mean we go out and buy Dove soap. Now, they found the opposite to be true when other brands within the Unilever umbrella have run smaller campaigns to smaller contingents, and even when those campaigns weren't remembered very well afterwards, they could affect huge increases in sales. So, for instance, Ben & Jerry's, another Unilever brand, for a short period, ran a campaign where they changed the name of their Chubby Hubby ice cream to Hubby Hubby in support of gay marriage legislation, right? Very clever. Sales of Ben & Jerry's increased by 45% when they did this. Right. Now, to a lot of us in the room, this makes intuitive sense, and intuitive is always a dangerous word when you're talking to a client. But we know that this is a contingent of people that feel very passionately about a certain subject, and Ben & Jerry's is a fun, clever, playful brand that reached the right audience at the right time with just the right message, and people went out and bought ice cream. But here is the danger in relying on data too much, because it's only half of the equation. The other half is that ability, that creative ability to connect with an audience, and that's much more nebulous, and it's the type of thing that can drive clients crazy, right? The numbers should equal success. The facts should equal truth, but they don't necessarily. If they could rely on the data 100%, they would be very happy. But the fact that they have to dive into this nebulous area makes them very uncomfortable. Now, a lot of us know this quote from Henry Ford: if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? And, the point is fairly clear. As consumers and as human beings, we don't always know what we want, not specifically. Now, generally, we all more or less want the same thing. We want to be healthy, we want to be happy, we want our lives to have meaning. But in order for advertising to work, we have to tap into that facet of our existence that wants more. This has been called the American curse. We can also look at it as just sort of evolutionary drive, that wherever you are, however well off you are, you want a little more. If a commercial message can let you know that your life can be better and give you a pragmatic means of making it so, then it can be it can work very well. But the promise that you make to the consumer needs to be both credible and irresistible. Consider historical campaigns like a computer that can make you feel cool and artistic, a beer that can make you feel interesting and worldly, a sneaker that can inspire you to push yourself even further. Now, some of you may bristle at the notion of self-definition through brands, but that's not what we're talking about. Brands can provide a sort of shorthand, right? We all have strong ideas about who we are, but our ability to make it clear to ourselves and to communicate it to others, that can be tough. We like to align, it's a psychological phenomenon, we like to align our thoughts with our behavior. It creates a sort of inner harmony. So the decisions we make, right, we don't want to create that cognitive dissonance. The decisions we make should align with our belief system. And some of our decisions are buying decisions. So in what we choose to wear, what we choose to drive, what we choose to eat, we're clarifying for ourselves who we are, and we're also expressing that to the world as well. Now, with all forms of art, whether it be advertising, music, literature, when it really, really works well, it's when it connects with the audience on that visceral level like Ben & Jerry's did. And we can think of our favorite song or a great passage from a movie or a great passage from a book. The things that connect with you deeply, that really just get you in the gut and shake you inside out, these are the things we go for, and these are the things that are part of the creative process to reach, right? So, and typically, even when these messages are ultimately uplifting, they usually tap into something dark and secretive inside of us, fears that we don't share with other people, like the way we doubt ourselves, or our worry that we're missing out on something, or our frustration that people don't get us, or our fear that our lives maybe aren't that meaningful. These are profound beliefs, and for the people that hold them, they remain, again, secret. These aren't things that people typically volunteer on surveys. These aren't data points that can be put into a spreadsheet and analyzed. To get this part of advertising and to make advertising great, you need empathy and compassion, and these things are the realm of the artist. Old Pablo said it best: art is the lie that enables us to realize the truth. And by extension, the artistic process is a sort of diving into the unknown, knowing that there are new truths in there to be found. It's a sort of faith that the artist understands because we've gone there again and again, and more often than not, we've come up with something great. Art is the conduit to finding truths that data can't reach. I'm going to repeat that. Art is the conduit to finding truths that data can't reach. It's the other half of the equation. Now, big data, analytics, measurement, these are wonderful things. They have immeasurably helped my industry. But they have also done their fair share of harm, because when we rely too much on the data, we create a culture of fear, right? When everything that can be known is represented by the numbers, then any mistake must be punished. Because if you make a mistake, it's because you didn't look at the data hard enough. Right? And this puts us in a state of paralysis where we're afraid to try anything new. Right? So any new type of idea that we're venturing will shun away, and instead we'll rely on the tried and true. And we can also hesitate on our decisions because there's always more data to look at and more analysis. So while this all seems prudent, it is not the path to progress. Too much fear can lead to mediocrity. So I'll leave you with this thought. I said at the outset that our history is rife with the resistance to new ideas, the rejection of new ideas, but history has also taught us that all progress relies not on relying on what we already know, but on imagining what can be. By asking questions like, what if the world isn't flat? What if we can harness that mysterious energy up in the sky? What if we could put a person on the moon? What if all of our computers could tap the same information source at the same time? What would that be like? All progress depends on ideas, and ideas are the product of the creative mind. So, for a takeaway, if we must have one, the next time someone hits you with an idea and you have that reflex to say no, stick with what you know, take it in, consider it, because maybe, just maybe, it'll take you somewhere. Thanks. All right. Thank you.